The golden hair, the dazzling smile, the shimmering tiaras. This is the last, radiant image of a 6-year-old girl, the most famous child beauty queen in America, JonBenét Ramsey. JonBenét's life appeared to be a fairy tale. She lived in an 11,000-square-foot mansion in Boulder, Colorado. Her father, John Ramsey, was the successful CEO of Access Graphics. Her mother, Patsy Ramsey, was a former Miss West Virginia. They were the picture of the perfect, affluent American family. But on Christmas night in 1996, while the nation was wrapped in holiday warmth, the Ramsey family was facing a relentless nightmare. A nightmare that would become one of the most controversial and enduring cold cases in American history for nearly 3 decades. That night, JonBenét went to sleep just as any other child does after a day of opening presents. But she would never wake up. At 5:52 a.m. on December 26, 1996, a panicked and broken voice came through the 911 emergency line.
Please, someone has kidnapped my daughter. Please, God, just come here.
That was the sound of Patsy Ramsey, the desperate mother. Patsy told authorities that when she went down to the kitchen that morning, she found something unbelievable resting right on the staircase leading up from the basement. A lengthy, handwritten ransom note, 2.5 pages long. This note was highly unusual and unsettling, reading like something pulled from a cinematic script. "We have your daughter. She is safe and unharmed. If you want to see her alive, you must follow our instructions. Specifically, do not contact the police or the FBI." The note was long and rambling, written with a pen and on a pad of paper that was torn from a legal pad found right inside the Ramsey house. And the strangest detail of all was the required amount, $118,000. An odd, specific figure, not millions of dollars, yet it strangely matched the exact amount of a recent bonus John Ramsey had received. Who could have known this personal financial detail? John Ramsey, following initial police instructions and his own panic, called friends and family to the house to help search. And this was the first catastrophic investigative mistake, an unforgivable oversight that would taint the entire case. The police arrived, but believing it was a kidnapping, they handled the scene with shocking carelessness. They allowed numerous people to enter and exit freely, potentially touching evidence, and essentially destroyed the crime scene before it could be properly processed. Detective Linda Arndt, who was in charge of the scene, simply waited for the kidnapper's call. But the call never came. Hours passed. Around 1 p.m. that afternoon, Detective Arndt, sensing the abnormality of the situation, instructed John Ramsey and a friend to search the house again, particularly in confined, hidden areas such as the basement. John Ramsey went down into the dark, seldom used basement, an area that was typically locked from the outside. And there, in a small, dark wine cellar room, John found his daughter. JonBenét was dead. She was wrapped in a white blanket. In that horrifying moment, John picked up his daughter's body and moved it, inadvertently causing further disturbance to the scene. An understandable, instinctual act of a father, but a disaster for forensic work. The subsequent autopsy revealed gruesome details that sent shockwaves through the nation. JonBenét had been struck hard on the head, causing an 8.5-inch fracture to her skull. However, she did not die from the blow, but from asphyxiation. The attacker had used a makeshift garrote, a ligature crafted from a piece of nylon cord, and a broken paintbrush handle, an item confirmed to have originated inside the Ramsey home, possibly even belonging to Patsy Ramsey's art supplies. The child also showed signs of sexual assault. The situation had shifted from an outside kidnapping to murder and staging inside the home, which entirely altered the focus. The body found inside, the note written on internal paper, and the garrote made from household materials led Boulder police to focus all suspicion on the only people who were there: the Ramseys. Immediately, the investigation ran into a massive legal and moral wall. Under the advice of their attorneys, John and Patsy Ramsey refused to submit to a formal police interview for months after the murder. This refusal immediately ignited public and media fury, fueling the core suspicion that an insider was the culprit. For the public, their silence could only mean one thing: they had something to hide. The family theory dominated the early investigation. There were compelling reasons: the ransom note's strange content, which some handwriting experts initially couldn't exclude Patsy as the author of, the fact that no clear signs of forced entry were found, despite a broken basement window, and the questionable behavior of the parents. The pressure culminated in 1999, when a grand jury actually voted to indict Patsy and John Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death. This was a significant step, indicating the jury believed there was probable cause for prosecution. But the district attorney at the time, Alex Hunter, made a shocking decision. He chose not to pursue the indictment. He stated that there was simply not enough admissible evidence to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. The case became a legal and public stalemate. The media was split, and the Ramsey family, though professing their innocence, remained under the cloud of suspicion, constantly pointing to an unknown intruder. But how could an intruder enter the home, commit murder, stage the scene with household items, and leave without a trace of external evidence? The answer would come from science, years later. In the early 2000s, forensic technology had advanced significantly since 1996, and science broke the endless loop of suspicion. In 2003, investigators re-examined the samples collected from JonBenét. This time, they focused on a tiny, invisible signature, DNA, and they found it. Underneath JonBenét's underwear, experts found the DNA of an unknown male. This trace evidence was later found on her clothing and other items. The most critical fact: this DNA did not match John, Patsy, Burke Ramsey, or anyone else known to the investigation. The discovery was an earthquake. It was the first piece of undeniable physical evidence that supported the intruder theory that the Ramseys had so adamantly defended. The focus shifted. The strange ransom note and the messy scene were no longer the main issue. The sole issue was now: an unknown man touched the victim. The DNA forced the district attorney's office to act. In 2008, DA Mary Lacey officially sent a letter to the Ramsey family, declaring that they were formally exonerated in the murder based on the DNA evidence. This was a tragically late vindication for the family, especially for Patsy Ramsey, who had passed away from cancer 2 years earlier in 2006, never seeing her name officially cleared. However, the joy of finding the DNA quickly turned into a new dead end. The male DNA profile was run through the National CODIS database, which stores millions of criminal profiles. No match was ever found. So, who was this man? Was he an unknown serial killer or an offender who had never been caught? Or was it simply contamination DNA, a minuscule trace transferred from the factory? Or a service worker? Or a clerk who handled the clothing before it reached the Ramseys? The investigation was stuck again, but this time, the original suspects had been cleared. The JonBenét Ramsey case was not just a murder, it was a media phenomenon. The Ramseys' wealth, their pageant lifestyle, and the sheer tragedy of the event turned the story into tabloid gold and cable news fodder. The family was placed under a giant public microscope, where every aspect of their private lives was scrutinized. This frenzy created an environment of widespread misinformation, conspiracy theories, and even false confessions. The most famous example came in 2006, when a man named John Mark Carr confessed to killing JonBenét. The media went into a massive frenzy, hailing this as the final solution. But when his DNA was tested, it did not match. Carr's confession was dismissed. He was merely an obsessed man seeking attention. During all this turmoil, the core mystery remained the ransom note. For years, the main question was, did Patsy Ramsey write it? Handwriting experts were divided, some claiming similarities to Patsy's script, others unable to conclude. But one critical fact remained. The note, supposedly written by a foreign terrorist group, used a terminology and details too familiar to the household. The writer even instructed John Ramsey to get a briefcase ready for the money. A hurried intruder would not write a 2.5-page note, nor would they use an odd, precise dollar amount, nor would they make fundamental spelling errors while taking the time to give excessive, verbose instructions. The note's complexity was a double-edged sword. It fueled the notion of an internal staging, but it also raised the possibility that the intruder was someone who knew the Ramseys well, a disgruntled employee, a handyman, or a service worker who knew about John's bonus. And here is the most damaging realization. The police had possessed the foreign male DNA profile since 2003, but they kept this information secret from the public. They knew a third party was involved, but they didn't officially exonerate the family until 2008. This concealment utterly destroyed the trust between the public, the media, and the police, creating a black hole that swallowed any chance of a timely resolution. As the years marched on, the JonBenét Ramsey case became known as the perfect cold case. However, in recent years, with the advent of forensic genetic genealogy, hope has rekindled. This technique, which solved the notorious Golden State Killer case, doesn't just compare DNA to criminal records, CODIS, but to the public databases used by people looking for their ancestry. Like Ancestry or 23andMe, investigators can now search for a match with distant relatives, a third or fourth cousin, and then build an extensive family tree to pinpoint the unknown perpetrator. John Ramsey, the heartbroken father, is still fighting. He has publicly pleaded with the Boulder police to utilize this technology, believing it is the last, best chance to unmask the strange man whose DNA was found on his daughter. The problem, however, is the quantity of the sample. The touch DNA found on JonBenét is a minuscule sample and extremely sensitive. There is a great fear that processing this last remaining physical evidence could destroy it forever. This hesitation from Boulder police has led to a renewed wave of criticism. John Ramsey argues that if they don't use the sample, the case is cold forever. But if they do nothing, justice will certainly never be served. If successful, genetic genealogy would do more than just find the killer. It would fully unravel the crime scenario. Who was this intruder? Did he know the Ramseys? Or was he truly a stranger who broke in on that fateful Christmas night? The answer lies in that DNA profile. The murder of JonBenét Ramsey is a tragic classic of errors. It is a painful reminder of the initial investigative incompetence, the polarizing effect of media, and the extended stalemate of justice. But above all, this case is about a 6-year-old girl, an icon of stolen innocence. Every detail about her, from her stage smile to her tiaras, has been turned into evidence, theory, and speculation. Today, John Ramsey lives on with hope. Burke Ramsey, the older brother who was relentlessly pursued and suspected by the media for years, now lives in seclusion, but also longs for justice for his sister. The JonBenét Ramsey murder remains officially a cold case for the city of Boulder. Yet, with the relentless march of science, hope flickers. The same DNA technology that cleared the innocent is now the only hope of identifying the guilty. JonBenét Ramsey rests in peace, but the truth about her death remains suspended, caught between old mistakes and new technology. We are left with the final, haunting question. After almost 3 decades, will JonBenét Ramsey finally receive the justice she deserves?